Oh, is that the penalty? Yeah.
You would need that one too. There you go.
Patience. Jeepers. All right, can you guys hear us now?
Thank you.
Hear you great.
Sounds okay?
Sounds super.
You actually. Nick wasn't late, he just texted me, I said Nick was running late.
Well, he wasn't exactly early. How's that? Okay, that back table is the panel that's kind of,
There isn't really a panel, so
Oh.
just talk.
okay, well,
So the people online
so the people online kind of feel like they're part of it.
can see
How
the
is that?
faces of whoever's talking.
Yeah. That's my thing. That's my bossiness. That's great.
Yeah. So I said, I don't know why people say that name so lazy, because I know what the heck, but then no, we'll look at his daughter. Yeah, red flag from sitting in the lawn chair, maybe, but,
Kicking back by the pool.
right.
Who it was talking to me to start gatekeeping on here like this.
Did you sign his name?
No.
Did you sign his name?
Yeah, I was
like
frantically planting stuff that won't go for nothing. And then planted stuff, pulled weeds and hoped that the weeds were still down and stuff, but I planted the stuff when I got back. For the most part, we got a little bit of rain, so
We got a feel of who's coming to what.
not too bad.
We've heard talk that it's gonna be
Yeah,
potential drought.
You're friends with me.
Uh,
I got you up the other day when,
There's this guy we watch it. on the
okay,
internet.
I was contacted by somebody from,
There might be what's called.
Yes.
and I go to the, he shows up, too. Somebody else asked him, come on in, young lady.
And then there was a,
Great.
Done.
where's that?
He's in the car. He thought, oh, well, he had texted me and said Nick was running late, so. He was trying to get out in the car. He mowed with a tractor all. I thought it was weird. And then we went to me. Our dog.
They were not wrong.
She ran out of the house and jumped in.
I think that's the
Not good
president.
over yet.
No, I,
She wanted to
that
go.
wasn't it.
Leave it there. And then when Tony said that, it's that her tractor, the guy came out and
And all I do. Or anything.
I'm good.
I don't know, they all went to places, you know.
Ended up finding that thing. That's kind of weird. I told you.
Sarah, can you hear something?
He's coming, he's poking. All right. All right.
The audio off.
Yeah, so it was weird. I didn't.
You guys hear something?
Ended up there about.
There you go.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I was, you know, an hour drive. so
We
it's
couldn't
kinda like-
find my queen today.
I was kind of like, oh, you know, you just turn around. and
Split it anyway.
No, thank you very much. They would like to hear this.
Okay. Okay, welcome to our meeting. We are going to be talking about a variety of things. We've got a panel. We've got Tom Panconen as part of this panel. What's your name?
Schmidt?
Schmidt comes from Peoria to join our panel. Who do we have online on our panel?
I don't know if they're on yet. Luca is maybe gonna be on. He was having a meeting with Chillicothe was.
Okay,
Like
okay.
that.
Okay, let's see. Next month's meeting will be on PEP. Arthur Parks is gonna be talking about it. Now, our next Bees and Brews is Coochie's on the Water, which is over in Creve Coeur. The next one has been shipped from Schooners in Morton to Schooners in Bloomington. So,
It's a pecan, right?
oh, wherever, well, okay.
You'll
okay.
send it.
We'll get it there. Okay, the hives, the club hives have been, we've had pretty good attendance at the club hives as far as, going through some things and seeing some things. And as usual, the girls pull their little stunts on us and all of a sudden they're swarming, they're not swarming. You know, so that's part of what tonight's activity is about is how, you know, working on those kind of things. How to super, how to split, how to check for honey bounds, because right now the girls are bringing in a lot and they're actually, in a sense, they're starting to, almost, you know, things are happening and that's what part of the panel is going there. Anything else? What books do you have, Cynthia?
Run around.
Okay.
We
You got a dummy,
So people, there's some new people.
Huh?
I think there's some new people.
new people? Oh, never.
Everybody's been here.
I think so. Anybody not been here before? Well, he's coming. How are those girls doing there? Yeah, he was the sweet husband that went to Farm and Fleet and bought, and kind of like, I bought you a present, honey. And they all both kind of go, oh. So they end up with these. Now, welcome, Kelly, from your road trips. Oh, and you're sliding in.
Survived the Zion trip.
Yeah.
National Park.
Okay, so again, this is an opportunity for you to meet other beekeepers. The European Swan, anybody around the Swan area, because they can always use a mentor and stuff like that. So again, there are different ways of going about things. All right, anything else I need to add that anybody can think of? Yeah? Jane?
Huh?
Oh, well, okay, let's, board, I'm Patty Graham, Tom Kretz, is, having some issues with an inflamed pancreas, so, he's not here. Okay, so, and then James is on our board, Cynthia is our equipment manager, which, by the way, on my little letter, there's gonna be a little note sent out about making sure the equipment's clean when it's returned. Honey and wax and propolis gets everywhere, but when you borrow equipment, you do need to clean it inside and out. So when you see something, that's what's happening. Ken back there has been doing our monthly tips to be handled with it. Tom is a consultant for us, and I think I got everybody. Oh, and Cindy, because I was supposed to be here. Yeah, I had you gone, well, you had a picture someplace.
Yeah, we went to Zion on National Park.
Okay, that's,
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's why I said she
It
wasn't,
was awesome.
yeah, that's what I wasn't expecting it. So she's our vice president, so she's there, all right? Okay, Tom, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, we're gonna talk real quick about the presentation we didn't get to last month. Because we had such good discussion on other topics, so we're gonna kind of zip through splits a little bit, and then we're gonna talk about it a little bit more when we talk about swarm control and kind of field it from some of the more experienced beekeepers that are in the room. I see 4 or 5 easy in here, at least that I know. So yeah, so why would you want to do splits? It's thought by many to be a chemical-free mite treatment by being a brood break. I think it's kind of effective for that. I'm not sure it's the best method for treating for mites, but every little bit helps. It's a great way to prevent swarming. So how many people have lost their bees this year so far? Nobody's had a swarm?
Not me personally, but we had two beginners.
Well, that's fantastic.
Swarmed.
Well, does the guy catch him?
Nobody's swarmed.
I swarm, but I caught him. No, one swarm, but then the hive had like 6 queens in it. So then we started split.
Well, we didn't have a lot of overwinter hives. So to prevent swarming, it's a great way to manage the amount of brood inside of the hive. And then, of course, to make increases, so a great way to don't buy bees, right? To make your own bees. And it's my favorite is it's an emergency backup plan. So it's a fantastic way to have a queen on deck when something goes wrong. Particularly if you have a laying worker, it's about the only way I've found to fix that. Great way to replace a rolled queen, so your hive's stuck with bees, you pull a frame out and roll it between the frames. And squisher. And there's a thought about solstice queens where your queen is mated after the summer solstice and she feels that it's spring and will put the hammer down. Lay up the frames really good for winter. So when do you do these splits? And anybody else with experience or has other ideas, definitely pop in here, because there's definitely some experienced beekeepers here. I like to say the blackjack rule is that if you have 2 queens, you always split. So just something to keep in your head. So that means if you find a queen cell, you see a virgin queen running around in your frames, any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's a great time to do it.
What if you have a very prolific hive that just keeps making the queen cells? I mean, you can only split it so many times, right?
Well, I mean, there's swarmy bees for sure. So I would say probably replace that queen, switch her and replace the queen and see if the genetics change helps. I mean, usually it's because you're out of space. Usually it's managing space, managing the amount of brood, making it feel like there's plenty of room inside of there. And anybody else want to throw their thoughts in on that?
If you've got brood and resources to go with those queen cells, it's always an opportunity to make a split, right? So it doesn't have to come, those resources don't have to come out of that exact hive.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about that. I think his thought, and I'm not trying to stop him, but he's in town.
Yeah.
So in Bloomington, we laid down and let him put a rule in place that said you can only have 2 hives in your property in town limits. So he's kind of pinched if he has 1 hive and wants to swarm over and over, he can technically only have so many boxes inside of his yard.
Lots of friends.
Only so many friends, right? And only so many, so much parking.
40 minutes away.
Right, exactly. Right.
So what do you do?
I'll take that for me, queen.
What do you do if you need to split, but you don't have room for another hive or don't want another hive?
Yeah, so we'll kind of come across that. If I don't come back to it, let me know. But I think you just heard, there's a lot of people here that'll raise their hand and say, I'd be happy to take brood, queens, any of that stuff from you. I know, like you post that somebody's got a swarm, usually there's 15, 20 people respond to it because they want bees, right? It's the same situation. So you say, hey, I got a split I got a frame with a queen cell on it. Does anybody want it? A lot of times somebody will pop up. Yeah.
My thing is I like to have 12 hives in that area. And I have a friend that comes in the springtime, we go through and we split our hives. I'll sometimes keep and sell some nukes and I give him some of the meat whenever we get the splits. And then I've also done that in July after the flow was over. Sometimes I had 1 year where all my hives were real strong, so I split them down then also. And we get it then, and if you can find a friend that doesn't mind the extra bees, that's a good way to do it, and then they can come in and help you do the splitting. And they benefit from it, you benefit from it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know most of you are probably tired of me saying this, but find a bee buddy. How many people have had bees more than 3 years in here? Okay, so those that don't have their hands up, look at the people that are raising their hands and say, hey, let's talk. Can I come hang out? Can we work bees? Can we trade some stories,
I've
whatever?
got a thought myself in regards to when you see these issues here. First thing in the spring, I'll take any queen cell I can and start
some queens to have in my back pocket. But if it's a line that seems to always be swarming, I would try to avoid getting too much of that bee or that queen genetics. And I'll be looking at the bees that are the strongest coming out of winter to start creating some extra queens then. I hate to split things up from a strong colony right away, but that's the genetics I want to get, is the strong genetics that are, have the traits that I like to look at, as opposed to, like you said, a swarmy queen.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So what Ken's saying is he's selecting from his stock. So the ones that are treating him the way he wants, for example, like Michael Palmer says, I don't like bees that staple my socks to my ankles. So you want nice bees. You want good honey producers. You want bees that make it through the winter. You want bees that maybe manage, their hygienic behavior, that kind of stuff. You can tell most of those yourself. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that, and you can ask for help to identify some of that stuff for sure. To say, are these calm bees, or are these mean bees? That takes a little bit of experience, and that takes a little understanding of what the environment is around them and things like that. But hopefully your mentors that you're working with, and that's plural, mentors, find a bunch of people, shake hands with them and say, hey, can I come play bees with you throughout the summer? Because it's always good to hear somebody else's opinion, or be able to say, can I come work bees with you? Everybody always asks me, they say, can you come work bees with me at my house? And I say, no, you can come work bees with me in my yard, because I have more hives that you can go through and see more diversity. You can see, I guarantee I'll have one that's in sad shape, and I guarantee I'll have some that are in great shape, and everything in between. So we can go through them as long as you want to work bees, and you'll see more that way than going through one or two hives. That's not to say that sometimes I won't go help somebody out at their house or something like that, but that's usually why a lot of times a mentor will say, come work bees with me, because you're going to see different stuff. You're going to see how I do it. And it's not me saying, well, I would do it with this, but you don't have this, or I would do this and you don't have that, or this, you're going to be on my terms and my turf. So I'll have all the things that I use to manage bees to show you. And you'll get to see different kinds of hardware you might see. Like, for example, you were texting me earlier about feeders and stuff like that. It's a lot easier to say, or maybe somebody was texting me about feeders too. I know you did too, sit here and bring me one, but somebody was asking about what kind of feeders to use and stuff like that. So that's a great way to see it, is you can. No, I'm not giving you control. So you can see different kinds of feeders. For example, the sayings, they like to use the cake topper kind. There's other people that use, and actually, since you're divided bees, do you both use the cake toppers, or?
Actually, we got a little bit lazy this spring, and we took 2 5-gallon buckets, and we put a bunch of straw in it. We filled up the buckets with sugar water.
So you did open feeding. So, but that's why a lot of times you say, come see this, like even down to using different kinds of hive tools, different accessories. I think a lot of times when you're new to start bees, you see the catalog, you see all the things in the catalog, and you're like, oh, I gotta have all this stuff, and really you don't. Most of it you don't need. Like, for example, frame grabbers kind of drive me nuts, because most of the time you'll drop the frame with the frame grabber. At least that's been my experience when I see people try and use them, or when I've used them too. It's hard with dexterity.
And
stuff
the
like
plum
that.
hives have a variety of equipment styles, and that was the purpose of some of them,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
different styles and stuff.
So back to the splitting here. So the best time to do it is like right now. So when you're on a good nectar flow, when your bees are strong, when your bees tell you it's time to split. And what does that mean? So new people say, I don't know how to read the frames inside of my hive. And we'll get to some pictures where we'll be able to go through some of that. But you really have to understand the life cycle of a bee. You have to understand 3 days as an egg, 6 days as a larva, and then 15 days or whatever it is for whatever the remainder of 21 days is as a pupa. Right. So if you understand that, you can figure out your timing when you see things. So for example, somebody was texting me, I don't even remember who it was, about queens and stuff like that. And they said, well, how long do I have before my bees are going to leave and swarm? And I said, do you have a capped queen cell? And they said, yes. So I said, well, that tells you how old that queen is. So you know, and they're like, how do I know that? Well, 3 days plus 6 days is 9 days, so it's at least 9 days it's been in there. So you have an idea, you know, queen's gonna be, she's gonna come out at 16 days. So there's 5 days in between there, right? Or sorry, 7 days in between there. I'm horrible at that. So understanding those kinds of things. So good nectar flow, the hive strong, booming with bees, you're gonna have great success in those circumstances. Is that the only time you can make a split? Absolutely not. You can make a split anytime you can make it work. So you just might have to work a lot harder to make it successful. But when you have this situation, things are gonna go well. It's gonna be a lot easier. All right, so there's a couple of options of how to make your splits. There's a walkaway split, which is my personal least favorite. And I'll explain why. You can requeen by either buying a queen or taking a queen from somebody that has one, or whatever method of acquiring a queen. You can use queen cells, or you can do the on-the-spot queen rearing method, which is one of my favorites for new people, or actually even experienced people. It's a great way to make splits pretty easily. So the walkaway split, the idea here is a lot of times you read in the books, they'll say it was kind of called this because you put a second bottom board down, you would crack the 2 boxes, you would put 1 box on one board and 1 box on the other board, put a lid on it, and walk away. Now, I will warn you that that's a very dangerous way to make a split. For example, a friend of mine has some bees on my yard by my house. And we watched, he planted a garden out in my front yard, and we watched the bees swarm. And they swarmed up onto the tree branch. And so we went and planted the back garden, and he came back, and the bees went right back to the hive. So he went and ran some errands, we came back over and we went through that hive, we found a queen, we made a split with her, and off we went. But as we went through that box looking for that queen, if we would have taken that top box and that bottom box, he would have not had a queen because there was no eggs in that top box. So he wouldn't have had anything happen there other than he would make some sad bees, right? They would starve to death or die off because there's no replenishing them. So he had mostly honey in that top box, and that's why they swarmed, because they ran out of room. So what you want to do is go through those boxes, and this is a great time. Again, ask your mentor, say, hey, can you come over? We'll go through and do this. I want 2 sets of eyes, or even a bee buddy. Even if you're 2 new people that are at it, 2 eyes are better, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, you know, looking at it, but go through and split everything up equal. You got a frame of brood, put a frame of brood. So each box has a frame of brood, frame of eggs, frame of larva, frame of honey, frame of honey. So everything's equal between those boxes, and then they can make a queen out of that. And same thing with the bees, you want to equal them out. Now, will they always equal out? No. There's some tricks to that. We'll kind of talk about that when we go into the panel part, but that's really the way to be successful when you're doing a walkaway split. And now a lot of people say, I don't know how to find a queen. And I didn't just say anything about finding a queen today. So it doesn't matter in that circumstance. So she's going to be in one of the boxes, and if the other box has eggs, you're in business, right? So if both boxes have eggs and one has a queen, you're good to go. They're going to make a queen in the one that doesn't have the queen.
You need to put that second box any distance from the first box. That's all you're working.
Yeah, so that's a heated topic. What do you guys think about that?
Oh, I'd say bring it to our place.
No, but sometimes all the workers go back to the first one, and then you think you have.
I've seen where they just go back to the original hive.
You think you have
and it's just
50-50.
empty out
Yeah.
the second hive.
And an old boy that mentored me in the beginning and kind of gave me some tips and tricks. What he said was, when you make a split, put the new one where the old one was, and move the old one to another spot. And that way all the foragers will come back to that new one, that weak one. It's a pretty good trick. I do it all the time, actually. No, that's not fair, because a lot of times I'm too lazy to lift the big hive. So that I'll move nukes around like that for sure. Where I'll move a strong one over to where a weak one is in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
How far apart do you move them?
What are your thoughts? How far do you guys move your splits? Because you're gonna hear everything, right? And none of them are
A
wrong.
couple miles away from each, we're running 4 different locations.
Sometimes.
I go about a foot. But what I did is the one that the new one, I load that one up a little heavy because I know the foragers are gonna come back to the old one. So I move the queen over, make sure she's got enough to, so I kind of go heavy on that one and the one
So
that's
you
in
know,
the
like
original
60,
spot.
40,
Huh?
60-40 split.
Probably. You know, but I go heavy that way, because I know the foragers are gonna come in. And I'm going between 10 and 2, so the foragers are all out there.
Yeah.
Steve, how about you?
So I'm typically end of the same stand, next stand over, you know, it's within several feet, could be right next door. But I'm like her, I'll try, if I can, I'll try to move my queen to the new one and then give her less resources than the one I'm leaving behind, because I know all my foragers are gonna stay at my old location. So that'll help them continue to bring in resources while they're building that new queen cell. And then
Explain resource.
that could be anything from nectar, pollen, water, stuff to make, yeah.
Eggs, larvae. The things, right?
The
Make
things.
these.
Couple things.
Another method that sort of simulates a walkaway split, but it keeps everything in one box, is you can get what's called a Snellgrove board or a double screen board. And you do the split so that you have, you know, like the double screen board will separate the pheromones of the two boxes. And so you have your one box and you don't have to identify the queen. You just make sure you have even resources in both boxes. So you then put that Snellgrove or double screen board above the top or the bottom box. And then you put the other box on top. The one that doesn't have the queen will say, hey, we're queenless. They'll make a queen in place. And it might even get you around some of the issues of being in town and only able to have two boxes, because you could renew your queen and then combine them back later on. And you can still give them honey supers, you got that whole colony there pretty strong.
Yeah, so basically what a double screen board is like a piece of plywood with a hole in the middle, or sometimes it has multiple holes, depending on who you buy them from. I'm not sure one's better than another, but the screen, there's a piece of screen on the bottom of the hole, or a piece of screen on the top of the hole, so there's a gap between them. And then there's a lip then on one side of that board that allows an entrance on there. So you want that lip facing up for the box above, so the top box has an entrance and the bottom box has an entrance. And typically, you put one facing one way and one facing the other way. You could probably get away with it the other direction. It's kind of funny. A lot of times, everything that's the rage with beekeeping is really what was old school. So if you go look at those old books that we got in our library, that's all new school beekeeping, right? So that's what all the people that you're watching on YouTube are telling you is the stuff that was written in the book in 1890, 1910 and stuff like that. So the Snellgrove method, that's a long time ago that came out, but Bob Binney's made it real famous on there, and he's great. He has good talks on YouTube about everything you could think of, but
He has a video on splitting your
Handful of
license in the double screen board.
there's like a handful of them on how to do those splits, and some of them, there's like one he's talking to a bee club, and one he's out in the yard doing it. Cayman Reynolds talks about it. Pretty much everybody that's all the YouTube personalities has got a video on.
He actually uses those double screen boards to overwinter small colonies above a strong colony.
I've done that this year too. I had pretty good success with that. I highly recommend it, and they're pretty cheap and easy to make. You don't have to be a woodworker there, you can make them out of plywood, just make sure you paint them real good.
Not a legal expert, but I would say that let you have two colonies in one box space, so.
Yeah, my neighbors aren't real good at identifying what a colony is, so that's good. So I don't know. Yeah, right, one stack of these is a colony.
That's a colony.
So after you do all this, you're gonna go in there and check 2 weeks later and see either the results of what you did, or hopefully see some eggs or something like that. Keep in mind, when you're doing this, it could take 2 weeks, it could take 5 weeks, anywhere in between there. Sometimes maybe even pushing 6 weeks. It depends, like, don't panic until you hit 5 weeks. That's kind of the moral of the story, and that's tough. I've had to talk a lot of people off the edge. When they do this, they're like, I don't see her yet, I don't see any eggs. Like, just be cool, you'll see it, it'll work out, I promise you, and then ta-da, it's there, most of the time. The reason why I don't like this one, is I like to make bees. Now, in your situation, you don't want to make bees because you only got 2 hives, can have 2 hives in town. Right, so this is probably a good solution for you to go ahead and divide up your bees and let them work slow and build up slow. But personally, if I have bees, I want them to work. I want them to make honey. I want them to be strong for winter. That's my number one concern, is I want strong bees going in the winter. Everything else is great, honey, all the other things, but I know I just said it in the wrong order, but I want my bees strong for winter. That's goal number one, clean and strong. So if I'm doing this, depending on the time of year, I could put those bees in a real bad situation, because they're not gonna necessarily build up. So like if I did a walkaway split in, say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'm gonna have them requeening in the dirt. So that's not gonna go as well as it would right now. I'm gonna be putting them into a dirt where they're gonna get robbed. They're not gonna have nectar, they're not gonna have pollen, they're gonna be starving a lot of times unless you're feeding them wisely. It's gonna be a lot more work there. And then building up, you still gotta keep the feed on them if there's no feed coming in, so that they can make lots of baby bees to get strong for winter. So keep in mind, winter starts in July. I know you're like, so that's when you're sweating good, that's when the bees are getting ready for winter. You gotta go backwards from frost date, like nine weeks, so 3 cycles of bees. So frost date is like October 10th, I think, or something like that in our zone. So if you come back to that, that's the beginning of August and July. So that's when you gotta make your preparations. That's when you wanna be treating for pests. That's when you wanna make sure they've got nutrition and all that stuff.
So making a split this time of year, you can make a smaller split to get away with, you make a split in July. It needs to be strong. So you can get that buildup for winter. You go making small splits in July, they're not gonna build up quick enough. But this time of year, you can make a smaller split if you're just wanting to grow your hives. You can make that smaller split and let it build up over the summer and through the honey flow, and you'll be okay.
And I think what a small split, a strong and a weak split is coming up on some other slides, but what that means is how many frames of bees you're putting in that box. So when I say bees, I mean eggs, larvae, and brood. So that's what I'm looking for when I say bees for that situation. So now keep in mind, like what Steve said, your resources can come from all your hives. So if you have 3 hives, you can take a frame of bees from each of your 3 hives and make a split out of that, so that you're not taking one down to its knees. That way you're hopefully, and we're gonna talk about that. That's the whole goal of this meeting, is to talk about like what you should be doing as a beekeeper through June, July, August, like through the season, the strong season of what to do to keep your bees in good shape. But a lot of times that means you're gonna be taking bees from one and putting it in the other, and then when you have an excess, you gotta do something with it, and sometimes that's making it split for it. So requeening, this is where either you buy a queen or something like that, or get a queen from a friend that's got an extra or something like that. I think PK was saying the other day she had like 5 or 6 queens running around inside. She seems to have that every year. So she's lucky that she catches that. Most of the time there afterwards, you'll see 5 or 6 queen cells and 1 queen, but they've killed them already. But you seem to be really lucky to catch them.
Well, I'm going in once a week
Yeah.
for these inspections.
So that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that does.
So the gist of it is you're gonna take 2 or 3 frames of bees. So that's gonna be a frame of dark bird, frame of light bird, and a frame of eggs and larvae. That's what I like to use. You could use 3 frames of dark bird. You could use 3 frames of light bird. and you could use 3 frames of eggs and larvae, but I like the delay, of the eggs and larvae, the light brood and the dark brood, so that I'm not just overwhelming that hive. And they're out of space so quickly. It's kind of like a delayed fuse there. So if you think about the math, if I have eggs and larvae, that means I got, whatever, 15 days until they're gonna be out and stuff in the box, and drawing wax and doing all those things. So I don't have to sit there and monitor that nuke right away. But some days, yeah, I just made a whole bunch. I made probably 20 splits, all dark brood. And they're monsters, and I lost 4 of them, actually, they swarmed, which is crazy. Like I put a mated queen in there and they swarmed right away instantly. Because they were stuck with bees. So you think of one frame of bees is what, 7,500-ish bees, something like that. That's a lot of bees. So if you have 3 frames of that, that's gonna get the party started pretty quick. So the feed we talk about in here is frame of wet nectar and some pollen. If you use capped honey, I found a lot of times the bees won't eat that honey. I have to scratch it, or I have to open it up. Sometimes when they're really starved, they'll eat it. But most of the time I find they won't touch capped honey. I don't, is that everybody else's experience? Or do you have them eat the capped honey when you make your splits?
It's been wet honey when I put, yeah.
I'll move capped honey, but looking back, I don't know if they actually end up using it. Usually it's a time of year when there's so much fresh nectar, because we're peak nectar flow, that you're probably just bringing in fresh nectar and using that before they dive into any capped honey, and then it just ends up being long-term resources.
Yep. So you're putting some in there for insurance later. That's a good point. So the key to this is that when you're making a split, there's no queen in there. So if you're taking a frame that has a cell on it, you want to cut that cell off. This is one that you're gonna actually put a queen in, a mated queen in. So you want to make sure there's no queen, either a cell or an actual queen on frame, that kind of thing. So you say, but Tom, I have a hard time identifying the queen. Well, fear not. What you can do is just put a queen excluder and shake all your bees through it. So I know that's intimidating to a lot of people. They're like, oh, I'm gonna hurt my bees, or they're gonna fly up in my face, or they're gonna do something like that. They might a little bit, but they'll get over it. So if you just kind of if I do that, I like to put a box above that queen excluder and kind of shake them in there and just give them a quick snap like that, or sometimes I'll bang it against the box and they'll all fall down. And then you can kind of smoke them through that queen excluder. And if there's a queen, she'll be sitting on that excluder. So you'll be able to keep her separate from that split. So another way to do it is the exact opposite. So you can shake your frames of bees that you're gonna make your split with, shake them, and then put those in a box above a queen excluder. And that's kind of a good trick. The next day, you can then take that box and move it away, and it'll have the exact amount of bees in there that you need. Because the bees will move up and cover that frame to the amount that they need. So that's a good trick there too. So either way, you use that queen excluder to find your queen if you're not good at spotting her. Does that make sense? Question? How does it do that? Okay, good. So I like to let it sit for a day before I add a queen to it, and then I'll put a queen cage in there. Very similarly to how you put a package in, I want that queen cage, the metal screen on that queen cage facing the bees so that they can tender and take care of her. And yeah, so I'll go back and check probably in a couple of days to make sure she's out of that cage. And yeah.
Okay, my question, because I did a split and it was 3 days, somebody had an extra queen, so I went ahead and put it in 3 days later. They didn't like her.
Okay. So
I didn't know if 3 days was like too long.
I was gonna come to that in
Okay.
a minute here. So what does that mean? They don't like her. How do you know that they're ready for a queen? So I would say you probably had a queen in there. That's usually what happens when they don't like her.
I had pulled the queen 3 days earlier and split it.
Maybe you had another one in there. Usually that's always why it happens. Like 9 times out of 10, there's a queen in there. I had somebody that bought a package for me and they requeened it 2 times. And they killed both of the queens, never made it out of the cage, but miraculously they had eggs and larvae and brood in that hive. So, it happens, they're shaking thousands and thousands of packages, it's very common to have a queen shook into a package. So, sometimes that happens, so how do you know that they don't like that queen? So what you're gonna do is take that queen cage with bees on it, and you're gonna hold it up between you and the sun, and you're gonna look at it and see what the bees are doing. So you're gonna look for their tongue going down to feed her, or to feed the workers inside of there. That's what you're looking for. You wanna make sure that you can take your finger and sweep the bees off that screen. If you can't sweep the bees off of that screen, and usually they'll be biting, and they'll be holding on to the screen with their mandibles. That means that there's probably another queen in that hive where they need more time to get adjusted to her. So that's how you know. If they're biting, you'll see them like biting at the screen, or you'll see them trying to sting through the screen. You want to keep the tape over that, or that cork over that trigger plug for another day or two, and then go back and reassess the situation. If you're there 3, 4, 5 days later and they're still being aggressive like that, you probably need to go through and look in that hive and look for eggs, because you probably got a queen in there. Is there any other tricks that you guys use to know if they're treating a queen right, or introducing a queen?
Well, you were talking about, like if you take and shake all your bees off into the deep, you put the queen excluder on, and you put your balance box on top. You let them equalize out, then you move that top box over. Now, I think Patty said she waited 3 days.
I didn't do that on purpose. It was a matter of 3 days. And somebody said I got a queen. I said, well, okay, I'll put them in there because I had pulled that queen out.
But the other thing is if you got an equalized hive where you've got eggs in both boxes and you pulled them away after 3 days, they're gonna start making queen cells in that pulled away box. And you're gonna need to go through and check for queen cells that have been started and destroy those before you introduce the others.
That's a bullet I should add to that. So the next day, even 3 days later, when you're going to make sure she's out of the cage, go through and look for queen cells, even queen cups, and just squish them. I always squish my queen cups so I know what they're up to. So that I know that every time I'll squish them or move them with my hive tool or whichever I got available to me. Then that way I know the next time I come through, I either missed it or they're making something. So
You
that's,
gotta look really close because sometimes they're a master at disguising hiding queen.
yep. So like you want to either pat them on the frame so they move out of the way, or give them a blow on them a little bit and they'll move out of your way. Make sure those big balls of bees, you're moving them around to make sure they're not covering up queen cells on that frame. That is a very good point.
Check the corners, because they'll make them in the corners where you can't see them from the front or the back, if they're in between.
Yep. So a week after she's released, you should start seeing eggs inside of that hive. And that's another good time I would go in and look for queen cells. I'll tell you what, the last couple of years, I see like packages and I see nuke splits and nukes and stuff like that. They just want to re-queen even when they're in good shape. So sometimes you have to change their minds on some of that. All right,
So sometimes that'll happen when they're first released. And if you kill those queen cells, it gives them enough time for that queen to really stabilize and get her pheromones going. And then it'll be okay after that.
Yep, that's a good point. So once the larvae are over a certain age, they're not gonna make a queen out of it, or they can't make a queen out of it. So then you're in good shape, you're gonna pass that hurdle. But sometimes they'll make queen cells from a brand new queen in there, so you gotta watch them. You gotta get in there and work the bees, so check them once a week at least, if you can, when you're doing this. You might have to look out of the norm to catch some of that stuff. So a queen cell is the same exact thing I just said, except one of those frames is gonna have a queen cell on it. So whether it's the frame of eggs and larvae, whether it's the dark frame of brood, whatever, one or more of those frames is gonna have a queen cell. So you're gonna pull your 3 frames or more if you want. I like to do 3-frame splits because it's like a good amount of bees to manage. They have enough workers to do the job. Can you do it in 1 frame and get away with it? Yep. Can you do it with 2 frames? Yep. Sometimes you can't though if it's cold at night. So if it's chilly, like below 60 degrees at night, I wouldn't be making splits less than 3 frames because sad things will happen. And you'll be angry because you lose the bees that are in there. They'll get chilled and you'll be chasing a lot of problems the rest of the time that thing's going. So at 3 frames, you're gonna have pretty good success with it. I pretty much guarantee it. So again, 3 frames of bees, frame of light brood, dark brood, frame of eggs and larvae. If you want, add a frame of feed in there. That's always a good idea, unless it's right now, I wouldn't add a frame of feed in there because they're on a hell of a flow. They're gonna plug it up right away. No queen. And then I'm gonna go back and check in 2 weeks and see what the situation is. I'm gonna make sure that I'm starting to see signs, like I'm gonna look at my queen cells and look for a nice chewed cap on the bottom. Sometimes if you're lucky, it'll even be hinged, hanging on the bottom there. A nice chewed, clean, round hole is the one that came out. The ones with the gashes down the side of it is the presence of a queen too. Because they'll go in and I think, I've heard different stories. I've heard the queen will do it, and I've heard that they'll sting it, and then the workers will do that. They'll cause that gash down the side of the queen cell.
Just Game of Thrones.
I don't know what's right. It is. They can be not nice sometimes. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. So again, you can take your resources from multiple hives. It doesn't have to come from 1 hive. And a lot of the books tell you that that's true, but I can tell you that you can take it from multiple hives. If you couldn't, there would be no bees around because that's how commercial guys do it. So on the spot queenery, this is one of my favorite ways here to have people have confidence. I've taught some queen classes and I usually always show how to do this. And people they're tickled when it works out. You can make 1 or more splits from a strong hive. There's a lot of ways you can juggle it, but the gist of it is you're going to go through your strong hive, and you're going to take a frame of queen and then 3 total frames of bees at least. Take her, this time you're taking her and those frames of bees and making a split and walking away with her. So you can either put it in the same yard, a different yard, whatever you're into. There's not a wrong answer there. Then on the hive that's left over, you're gonna go through and look for a frame of eggs or frames of eggs if you want to make more splits. You want to take your hive tool and you're gonna go along the bottom of those cells and just mash the very bottoms of those cells with the width of your hive tool. So you're gonna go across 4 or 5 cells and do that in maybe 3 spots on that frame. You're gonna go back and check in a couple of days and you'll see queen cells made in the bottoms of those cells. It's pretty slick. So now if you want to make multiple splits out of that strong hive, you gotta have multiple frames of eggs that you're gonna do that to. Because you're gonna take that frame of queen cell and go make the split that I just talked about right here.
In regards to that, make sure.
Why do you
that
break those larvae up? I'm confused.
Okay,
Alright,
Ken,
so-
okay, Valerie and Ken, why don't you go?
In regards to that on the spot queen rearing, make sure that you leave an egg just right above your mashed in spot.
Yep.
Because you're just gonna mash eggs if you don't
And
have an egg.
I'll have a picture in a minute where I'll show you exactly the spot on the frame to do it. And it might take some practice, so you can mash a couple of different spots. You're not gonna hurt them. It'll be okay. And it
Valerie
doesn't,
had a question.
yeah, I'll get to it. in a
Okay.
second. So it doesn't matter if you mash on the top of the frame, the bottom of the frame, as long as it's eggs. So remember, eggs are the tiny white speck. Larvae are the worms in there. You could probably get away with very young larvae doing it on that, but if you do eggs, you'll be in good shape. So you're gonna go back in and look to make sure those cells are made. So Valerie, go ahead, your question.
I had a question and I'm not Valerie.
Oh,
And that
sorry.
was why do you notch them or mash them? I'm confused as to that.
Yeah, so what you're doing is you've taken the queen from the hive and you've said, this is the spot I would like you to make queens. So they don't have a queen in the hive, so they're gonna make a fertilized egg into a queen. And what you're saying is, I don't like poor odds, so I'm gonna make a bunch of those queen cells. So because one of them is probably gonna be a really good one.
Okay, so I already had some swarm cells when I did this approach, so that's why I didn't need to smash them, I guess.
Correct, that's correct, yep.
Yeah, so the act of smashing it actually gives them physical space to draw the peanut queen cell on the side of the frame. Otherwise, they kind of hang off the edge of the frame and then you get into space issues with the frame next to it, which is why we were talking earlier about how they like to hide them in corners and stuff because they have physical space to hang the peanut. So by smashing the cell, you're actually making physical space for that peanut to hang in the frame.
Yeah, it was technically called the Miller method, I think. Back in the day, because before we used plastic foundation, what they would do is they would take a razor and they would cut like V's in the bottom of the foundation. And they would just create cells in there. So if you go check out the ABC, the beekeeping, I forget what it's called. That one has it in there, or if you Google Miller method, or if you go to mdasplitter.org, I think it is, that's Mel Dickelkoffen. He's the guy that kind of went on the road talking about on the spot queen rearing. He's an old barber guy out of Michigan. He's a really good speaker. He sells his book for about $80 and it's well spent $80. So, all right, so some other notes in here. One of the things I like to do.
I don't think you finished the bullet points on that previous one, but maybe I'm
Okay.
mistaken.
What would you like me to cover on there? What's missing?
The 6 to 8 days, take the frame. I didn't read that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I probably went through it a little too quick, because I said you're basically gonna make this the queen cell method with what's left of that hive. So if you want to make one split out of that strong hive, you don't have to move anything. If you want to make multiple splits, then you'll have to divide it up. If that makes sense, you're gonna divide it up just like this method says, where you're gonna make 3 frame splits, or if you want to make 6 frame splits, knock your socks off, you can do that. It's fine. You can always put more frames in there. It's not gonna hurt anything.
If you're using plastic foundation, you can't get the cells off the frame. If you have wax foundation, you can physically cut them out of the frame and move them. So like, if we're talking about smashing cells and doing, an on the spot style, you might pick several different frames to do that instead of putting all 4 smashy spots on the same frame. If you put all 4 smashy spots on the same frame, you'll wind up with like 6 or 8 queen cells on one frame. And then no way to get those queen cells off that frame.
If you're gonna make multiple splits.
Yeah, if you're gonna make multiple splits. So if you're wanting to make multiple splits, spread those out across various frames, or if you have natural wax foundation, pick that frame. And then you can physically cut the cells out and then move them over to a new with your split, right? And cut a second little hole in a second frame and insert that in and give it a little crimp.
Sometimes you can get lucky and cut them off of plastic, but it's really not worth it.
That's not been my experience.
Yeah, it's most of the time it doesn't work well. And then you're gonna be disappointed that you made a split and you didn't get a queen in there. So that is the way, is to do it on multiple frames, and that way you're safe. And the bottom bullet, I went over before where I said, if you're gonna make weak splits, just make sure it's warm out at night or hot at night, so that they can manage that brood. Otherwise, they're gonna get chilled.
The smaller the split, the smaller the space you need to put them in. So don't put like a 2 or 3 frame split into a 10 frame hive. You make use of that 5 frame nuke you've got. If you're making 6 frame splits, throw them in some 10 frame equipment, sure, 8 frame equipment, sure. But the smaller the split needs smaller the space. In fact, when you get the queen rearing and you're hatching queens and you're putting them in little mating nukes is what they call them. They're little teeny tiny boxes, right? They're just a frame and a half of resources in a little tiny box just to get her where she's gonna go out and do her mating flights, right? So technically you can get down to the really tiny spaces. So your split and your space you're putting them in kind of need to be hand in hand in terms of so they can manage their space and entrance and things like that.
So a couple of tips here is I usually always say feed your splits. Right now, you probably don't have to, but you gotta watch your weather real close. If it's gonna rain for 4 days and you don't put any feed in that 3-frame split, they're gonna be in rough shape after that 3 days of rain. So it's always a good idea to throw some feed in there. Keep in mind though, if you put 2 frames of brood in that nuke, they're gonna have, and you do I call it a frame sandwich where I'll put 2 frames of foundation next to it, not drawn cone. They'll draw those 2 frames up in a week, no problem. I mean, they will get at, if there's a flow, they will get after it and draw that up, and they'll plug it up with honey too, a lot of times before that queen's ready to lay. So sometimes you gotta juggle frames out of those nukes as well when you're doing that. So you gotta, when you do these things and you're on a honey flow, you kind of gotta watch nukes a little bit closer than you might watch a hive, a 10-frame hive, just because you don't have the space, you don't have the real estate.
So Tom, you're saying that if you do, like, say you got a 5-frame nuke. And you pull those 3 frames that you described. One that's eggs, one that's young brood, one that's old brood. If you put 2 frames of foundation, your experience has been that they'll draw that foundation out in about a week if it's a full like now.
If it's a flow and you're using heavy wax foundation. I mean, I can show you pictures like,
They'll go cheap on foundation.
yeah, I will say. I'll cut a lot of corners. Don't cut corners on your foundation. Don't use the heavy wax or put wax on your plastic. Do whatever you need to do. But it'll pay tenfold the dividends on it. The double wax acorns or the heavy wax Pureco or what's the other, Premier is the one John sells, I think. Those are well worth your money. Acorn sells a triple wax. Those are insane. Like I put a frame of triple wax in and had a dark frame of brood emerge, like literally emerging frame of bees I put in that new, the next day it's drawn. No joke. Like half to 3/4 of that frame is drawn. Now, when I say drawn, I might need half the frame or a good portion of it, but a lot of times I'll see that queen laying a couple days later when I go in there and look. I mean, it goes really fast. So make sure, like right now, there's a huge nectar flow from your honeysuckle and stuff like that. So they'll just plug that up with honey. There won't be room for that queen to lay. So you kind of got to juggle stuff. So, and I have a bullet here that you could use these nukes actually to draw cone quite successfully. I think Keenan Reynolds just posted a video about using a swarm to draw foundation. That's a great idea. That's definitely old school in all the books. You know, the swarms that's their best job, is to draw foundation for sure.
So if you're getting like a swarm trap, like Steve sells through Elko. Steve McMahon, Matt. You would want to have not only old frames in there, but it'd be to your advantage to have a couple of frames of foundation that are well waxed.
Yeah, it depends on your situation. Like I have friends that put them out on deer leases and stuff like that, and they might not go back to that deer lease for a month or two. Like a lot of times they only do deer chores out there like every other month. So yeah, they could be swarming again in that much time. So it just depends what you have around. You know, you might want to give them some space for sure, but definitely put a frame of gnarly old comb in that swarm trap. You'll have a lot better success.
In general, nukes are one of the best places to make foundation.
Absolutely.
To draw a foundation, they, hands down, they do it as good as any of the bees, any of the big hives. They get busy on other stuff, but man, those nukes, they're just crazy about drawing home.
Yeah, it for sure. And I feel like there's a number of reasons. My favorite reason that I like to think is because they can manage that space like Steve was talking about, is they can manage their heat, they can cool down in there, like they can manage pests, they can manage attacks from wasps and hornets. When we were going through max hives the other days on Saturday, I found a bumblebee in one of the hives. That was a new one for me. I hadn't seen that before.
Carpenter bee
It's dead.
drilled a new entrance into my
We found 4 yellow jet or bumblebees in her hive today,
No, there you
all
go.
up on the top.
Yeah, so it's,
Alive.
Nope, very dead,
yeah,
every one of them.
they kill them. So be patient when you're doing this. And you may not be successful your first time. Depending on the situation, you'll probably be successful, but you gotta give it time. Time is cures all with beekeeping for sure. So one way or another, you gotta be patient with it. And the other thing is, if you're doing this early, before you have a lot of drones in your hive, you wanna look for purple-eyed pupas. So what does that mean? So you're gonna look at drone brood, take a capping off of it, and you'll see that their eyes starting to turn purple. That means they're at the right age where they will be sexually mature for that egg that's laid to turn into a queen. By the time she's ready to fly and mate, there'll be drones that are sexually mature. It takes 5 weeks from the time a drone egg is laid until that drone is sexually mature. So a good rule of thumb there is if there's purple-eyed pupa, then you know that you can graft or you can do any of these methods to make a queen and be successful with it. If there's not, you're not gonna have success, and it might be 5, 6, 7 weeks until you start seeing a mated queen. And the vitality of that queen is gonna go down the longer she doesn't mate. Just FYI, Dr. Rangali talks about that in some of her talks.
For our area, we're probably talking first, second week in April for that kind of rule. Typically past that, you start to have to worry less and less about it, but. You know, if you're getting a package in the first or second week in April and you're considering making a split because you're just getting the spring started up. You really gotta be paying attention to whether or not you've got drones that are the right age to do that.
Yeah, for sure. So here's some pictures that kind of go over what I talked about. So what is this? So can you see my pointer here? So what is this comb over here? These
Brown.
drones, very good. So drones and workers are gonna go horizontal and queens are gonna be vertical, always, no exception. Well, sometimes they might be cockeyed, but they're still gonna be vertical queens always. So right here is where I was talking about. This is a good example of one that was chewed out. So it's chewed out perfect. This is a queen that made it out and then died. This one's kind of a tricky one right here because at least based on the angle, there's a queen cell here with some burr comb on it. Or either that there's burr comb in front of the queen cell, I'm not sure, but there's both in there. And a lot of times on a honey flow, like if you graft queens, they'll actually plug up all those queen cells with burr comb around them, and it's pretty frustrating.
One thing to be aware of is, I know of a beekeeper who recently had her hive swarm, and he took the top box off and then set it on top of the inner cover, and she crushed most of the queen cells that were in that position there.
Yep, so a trick that I always try and tell people or show people is when I open up a hive, I'll put the cover upside down on the ground. And then I'll always put the box cockeyed on it, so like 45 degrees or something like that. And what that does, it doesn't squish a lot of bees. And then the other reason is it's not gonna smush any queen cells or anything like that on there. So I always like to do that. I'll put it kind of cockeyed, and I'll do it also selfishly because it's easy to unstick. You can put your foot on the lid and then pull that lid and get it unstuck and not be in a mess there. Because for example, you might be pulling honey supers and dropping it on there, or deep filled with honey. A deep filled with honey is like 90 pounds. So trying to screw around, trying to get that lid off there, it's a little tricky. So that's why I always kind of set it cockeyed. Or you can do PK's method where she just does it frame by frame instead of being dumb and with the whole heavy box. So over here, this is a dark frame of brood. It's gonna be that like dark chocolate color. You can see there's some lighter brood in here. I think that might just be the display. I've been still seeing quite a bit of variance on my frames with cool nights where I think a lot of brood was still getting chilled a week or two ago. So because I see a lot of frames that are very split where I'll see dark and light brood in between and stuff like that. So this is what I'm talking about when I say dark frame of brood. Now the other part of tonight that we're going to talk about is like supering and managing the flow and how to prevent swarming. This hive is a good indicator right here that they're starting to get honey bound. And there's a better picture to show you that. A lot of people say this is a nice healthy hive of Italians. The Cardinals don't tend to do this as much as Italians, but you'll see that fat honey around the top there. And if you look down here, a lot of this is filled with nectar, so there's no room for her to lay. Then over here, we got some pollen. Then we got some nectar here. This is off of a yard I used to have bees on that came on in like end of August, beginning of September, when nobody else, usually everybody was in a dirt. That yard went crazy. I mean, absolutely crazy. And this, I think this was the hive. I split this one hive like 7 times. It was crazy. So this one here is a much better picture of honeybound. Right here, you can see the brood nest is right here. It stops, and this is all wet. This is all nectar that they're getting ready to cap. So they're out of room here. And here, of course, we got yeah, we got a queen on both of them. So right here, she's on the left one, right there, she's not marked yet. And if you look in here, there's some eggs inside of that frame. There's a better picture of eggs here in a minute. Nice Italian queen right there. You can see they're doing their thing, making it easy to find her. So these are nukes that I've used these quite a bit. Now that plywood prices have come down a little bit, I need to make some more, but you can make 4 of these nukes out of a sheet of plywood. So I'm not sure what a 1/2-inch sheet of plywood is doing right now, probably like 35 bucks, I think. Back when I did this, I was complaining that it was 20. If you act really nicely, the people at Home Depot, they'll make the big cuts for you on their panel saw. And then it's not as precarious doing it on a table saw in your garage or at a friend's house that has the tools to do it. But this is called a Dr. Coates nuke. You can find it on bsource.com and plans on how to do it. I will say that this is made out of 1/2-inch plywood. These will not last forever. If you have a place where you can get them wax dipped, they work really, really well wax dipped. But if you don't, make sure you're painting these with multiple layers of paint. So at least 3 coats. Make sure you're getting all these edges of the plywood, because they will rot out on you. But if you don't do it, you can see this one over here. This is probably maybe 2 seasons old. You can see the lids all warped up. I've stopped making the lids out of 1/2-inch ply. I make it out of 5/8 at least. A lot of times I'll go fish scrap out of dumpsters where they're putting roofs on houses, and I'll use that for my lids. Just I like the thicker stuff. It doesn't seem to cup. And I don't put these shims on here because when they cup severely, then the lid gets stuck on there and it's just kind of a pain to get off. But I usually always put a brick on there. It's pretty easy to drill with a hole saw. 2 3/4 is the size of a mason jar. I like to drill that hole off center. So so if I do it off center, depending on where I put the lid, it could be on the front of the box or the back of the box. I don't like to put that hole in the middle. And the reason why is when it gets cool at night, they'll weep, and then you'll get that cluster of bees in the middle wet. And then they're not gonna do well. They're probably gonna die out.
My lids did a lot better after I started putting tin on the tops, just like our commercial boxes, our normal boxes. You just get roll flashing from the hardware store. And put it on the top. And then I stopped losing lids in like 2 years.
Yeah, the wax dip, I think was key for me, like getting that done. I know that's not available to everybody, but that it works really, really well. But yeah, a sheet of flashing, or a lot of times if you go ask those guys that are roofing a house, a lot of times they'll give you some scraps laying around. But it's not very expensive to buy a roll of that flashing. And you don't have to be a metal worker, you don't have to be a HVAC guy and make perfect bends and all that. You can kind of just creak it over the edges and staple it on. It doesn't matter. The bees don't care if it looks goofy. You might be the one who cares if it looks goofy. So find a friend maybe that does that kind of thing to help it. What's that?
You can use aluminum roll flashing or there's various gauges. You can get the bright shiny aluminum or a siding aluminum roll.
It's just that you were saying tin earlier.
Yeah. No, and then the light gauge flashing stuff, you can actually score it with a pocket knife. Or a utility knife and then bend it a couple times and it'll snap if you don't have 10 steps.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to work.
You could even screw metal roofing on it. You can score that with a knife too, believe it or not. The new stuff, not the old stuff, but not the stuff everybody wants for their band cages or whatever they call it nowadays, but. The new stuff, if you score it like 3 times, it will snap pretty easy. You can just screw it on your lid. So here,
Are you painting inside the box too, or no?
I don't paint the insides of my box. I paint the top edge, bottom edge, and the outside. I will paint my bottom boards. I paint everything on the bottom board. And actually, I've switched to spraying, so I'll use a sprayer. Pro tip there, go on Facebook Marketplace. It'll be the best money you've ever spent. The one from Harbor Freight that has a weird name, like starts with a K, I think. Those are really good sprayers, and they're like $200. And I like that one better than I like my Graco sprayer that I bought off of a commercial guy. So take that with a grain of salt. And it does use Graco tips, so you can get them at any store. So this is light brood over here. Right here. So light colored brood, that means it's younger. And then some things of note here. So here's larva right there. And those sitting in the cheap seats back there, you probably can't see it, but something to note here is that the larva is wet. So somebody was asking me, do I need to feed my bees? And there's no answer other than looking at the larva. So I might say, I don't need to feed my bees because in my yards there's a hell of a flow. But if I don't have foragers in that hive, like if I just made a split and all I have is young nurse bees, there's no foragers to go get food. So that's why I like to feed those splits that I make, because the foragers I don't move my bees away, so the foragers are gonna move back to the old hive. So that's why I tend to feed them, but you know, like when you put a package in or something like that, and people say, when do I stop feeding? Is you got to look at the larva tell the tale. So if you're not feeding and the larvae are wet, that means that they're bringing in plenty of food. And if they're dry, they're starving, and there's no in between. So this is pretty old, 2016 on here. So jars are probably about $4 more a case than they were there, but still the moral of the story is some sugar water is a lot cheaper than buying bees. So $200 and some for a nuke, or $135 for a package. You can make a split right now on your hives that are boiling, that are gonna go in a tree and make your own bees. So this is how simple it can be. These are just mason jars. You don't have to have a scale or measuring devices, just eyeball it. Just fill it about halfway, fill it with water. Actually, Kathy posted a good video, I think it was last year. You can search on the Facebook page of how she mixes up her syrup. She heats up the water. I don't bother with that, but you can, and it makes it mix a lot easier. Do what you want to do. It's with 1-to-1, you don't have to heat it. With 2-to-1, you can get away with not heating it, but you got to shake it really hard or mix it up really good.
A lot of times I just use hot tap water.
Yeah, so the hot tap water makes it go a lot faster.
Yeah.
That's for sure. That's the moral of the story. And the bees aren't gonna come back and be like, hey, you're being cheap, you didn't put enough sugar in here, they don't care. So just kind of eyeball about half. They're not gonna taste it and say, this just won't do, and not touch it. So there's a school of thought that says actually using thinner syrup is better to get them to draw wax and stuff like that, but using sugar usually does stimulate them to draw wax versus corn syrup and stuff like that. And these lids right here, these are done old school, so that's a finish nail, just poke through the lid, kind of, I jokingly say like a vampire bite. You can just put your fingers over it, shake the jar, and then you flip it over until it draws a vacuum, and then put it on the hook. And then this is what happens. So you start with what's on the right, and you get what's on the left.
Leaving feed on, you talk about taking feed off. If you leave feed on, does it harm anything?
Yes, so if they don't need the feed and you keep feeding, they're just gonna fill everything up with feed. So they won't have room to lay eggs, because they'll just be packing it away, right? So these are the ultimate hoarder. Right? They don't know, they always think winter's coming, right? So they're always doing the canning thing. They're putting everything up, for winter, because they don't know what the season is gonna be like. They were the original prepper. And they're always, they'd rather be prepared, so if they have access to feed, they're gonna put feed up in those frames.
Yeah, and actually, there was a guy that I knew of that was still feeding his hives, even whenever there was a honey flow, and so he was literally retaining all of his honey. So you want to be careful of that, once that,
Yeah.
if you get a package of bees, they've built up and they're gonna be able to make some honey for you. If you wanna stop feeding them, then that honey flow starts, because they'll just be full of sugar water.
And we're gonna talk about like prepping for winter in 2 months, so we'll start, I think we have 2 meetings where we're gonna cover those kinds of topics, so. More to come there. So the other topic for tonight is how do I manage, what am I looking at right now? When I'm going through my bees, one of the questions we had, and I never thought about it until they said something. And I forget who it was, it might have been a couple of people, but thank you for saying it, wherever you were. They said, you say work bees, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to read my frames, I don't know what's going on inside my hives. And that's where working bees with some other people is really gonna teach you a lot.
Okay, there was a question on feeding. When should we be using Honeybee Healthy or Hive Alive? Is that an all the time thing?
What do you guys think?
Spring. Yeah. you
Spring
do not
only.
want to feed that stuff in, especially the honeybee healthy, you do not want to feed that in the fall or when there's a dearth, because it'll drive them nuts and you'll have robbing everywhere.
So Honeybee Healthy is a feed stimulant made out of essential oils. And it smells and tastes delicious. It's pretty good stuff. It makes really good lemonade.
Lemongrass one of the things
It's lemongrass, spearmint, something, there's a bunch of recipes out there. There's a little bit of lecithin in it to make it, the oils mixed with the water. And it's a feed stimulant, and it does exactly that. It gets, what's that?
Isn't it a preservative too?
It is, so there's some schools of thought, there's some people that say it's hogwash, some people say it's true, I find it's true. I like to feed Honeybee Healthy in the spring to clean their guts, and I'll mix it a little heavy in the spring. Where you'll know what's in there, and it makes the yard of my house a little exciting, because the bees will be all around where I mix the syrup. So it's a bit of an adventure there, but I like to make it a little heavy with Honeybee Healthy in the spring and clean their guts out. Help the clean up the nosema that they had over winter, that kind of thing. And sometimes I'll use it, in July, I'll do the same thing. But it's gonna cause robbing, so go easy with it. Some people get excited when I say this, but put a little bleach in your water. If you don't have city water, definitely put some bleach in there, because it's gonna knock down the bacteria from your water, especially if you're on a well. You want to put some bleach in there to knock down the bacteria, because all that's affecting the bee's gut. So if your hive is weak, or if your hive is on the edge of a disease and you're giving it well water, chances are it might cause some bad things to happen there. So splash of bleach in there and I'll clean some of that up, just like your city drinking water. I know a lot of people say I don't want to do that, so.
The bleach dissipates pretty quickly. And you have the bees, if you have a neighbor with a swimming pool, they seem to like the stuff in the bleach there.
Yeah, so
Including the girls there when it was young.
So just so everybody heard what James said, if you put bleach in there, it'll oxidize off. So if it's chlorine bleach, it does oxidize off. So bromine does not. So that's like what's in your city water, I think in Normal, for example, in Bloomington, I don't know. But that one doesn't oxidize off, so it will go away. I like to put a pretty good dose of bleach in there, just to keep it from fermenting as quickly and getting moldy and funky and all that stuff. And I'll go through and I'll make a heavy bleach solution and clean my feeders before I put them in the spring too, just to knock down whatever funk might be on them, just to help the bees out as much as I can. So feeding is a whole 2-hour topic for sure.
So if I have some money now, it's time to stop eating, is that what you're saying?
Yes. Chances are if you're feeding, it's probably feed. Probably syrup, but it could be, other stuff. You taste it.
Okay, I guess the question is splash of bleach per quart or how much?
Yeah, you definitely don't want to use a splash per quart, but I would consult the interweb. I think I use 1/3 of a cup for 30 gallons, that's a heavy dose. That's a little more than, FEMA has some directions, during an emergency. You gotta make water or what to use, you could go off of that. You could go off of just. I wouldn't use as much as you'd use for cleaning surfaces or something like that, that's way too much. But, I would do your research and do what you're comfortable with on it. I know that's not the answer you're looking for, you wanted a recipe. I think my friend does. He puts a gallon jug in 2,500 gallons, but obviously none of us are mixing 2,500 gallons. Hopefully. Was that the, all right, so what should you be looking for in your hives? And Ken's kind of started doing this thing where each month we talk about, like, here's what you should be seeing, here's what you should be doing, here's what you should be prepping for next month. And I kind of killed him last month with the presentation because it was everything that he was going to talk about. And the same thing this month on it too. But there's a lot of people that aren't familiar with what they should be looking for inside of the hive. So I guess I'll just ask some of the experienced people, like what are you seeing inside of your hive that makes you happy, and what are some of the things you're seeing in your hive that's not making you happy? Who wants to go first?
Lots of nectar in the honey super, but then lots of nectar in the chamber too.
Deep red.
So,
So one makes you happy and one does not.
yeah, in the brood chamber makes you.
Yeah, so to make sure that's clear, so he said, I'm looking for nectar, but I'm looking for nectar in my supers and not in my hive bodies. Now, for those of you that are just starting your bees, you don't have drawn comb. So it's tough for you. So the bees don't like to draw that comb, no matter how much you want them to, they don't like to do it. So they're reluctant to do it. So you have to manipulate your frames around, and you got to do some things to make that happen. Sometimes I'll pull frames of honey or nectar out of my brood boxes and just lay it out in the bee yard for them to rob and strip. I'll move frames around for sure. My Amish friend always said, if you put a frame of honey in the middle of a cluster, they'll actually move it right out of there. I don't want them to do that work inside of the hive, but there's a lot of ways around it. So you got to manipulate your hive to make things happen that you want. So sometimes you gotta pull frames that are filled with bee bread. Sometimes you'll have 3 frames of this right here, and that's too much. So sometimes you gotta pull that out. Like Carniolan really pack in the pollen for sure. And I've heard that bees will do that when they're sick too. They'll pack in a lot of pollen, and I've seen that personally on some hives.
I saw the queens, when they're failing, they'll tend to overpack bee bread.
So what is the bee bread in that picture?
This right here. So what it is when the bees carry the pollen in on their pollen sacs, then they come in here and they mix it with saliva, and then they pack it into that cell. And what that does is it ferments it so that it's edible. So just like any human eating an organic protein, like if it's prepared somehow, it's more digestible, right? So like if you're gonna eat beans, you're gonna feed beans to your chickens. If you take raw beans and feed them to your chickens, they don't get as much nutrition as if they're roasted. So the same thing's happening here, is they're fermenting it just like sauerkraut or just like kimchi or kefir or something like that. It's preserving it and it's making it more digestible, so it doesn't spoil. Pollen is pretty not stable, so that's how they make it stay nutritionally stable.
What do you do when you have too many frames of bee bread? You scrape it and
I just pull it out and I move it around. So when I'm going through my hives, I'm constantly playing Robin Hood. I'm robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, and that it could be food, it could be eggs and larvae, it could be brood, it could be empty comb, those kinds of things. So one of the things that always makes me nervous is when I read on the Facebook page, people will say, I got 2 hives. I have one that's just jamming, one that's just a dink. And that's a problem because you have to balance those out. You need to take from that strong one and make that weak one so that they're 2 medium hives, right? So medium strength. So you don't want to have a weak one because you're just putting them at a deficit. So you got to think of what happens here. So this frame right here with this dark brood, you put this in a hive that's struggling, that's going to get the party started. There's going to be a lot of workers to do things. So those young bees that are emerging out, those nurse bees, those are the ones that do all the hard work. They're the ones that are drawing comb. They're the ones that are feeding most importantly, feeding the larva. If you don't have them, your hive is just going to sputter. So a lot of times that happens to new beekeepers, even old beekeepers that can't spot it. Is if they're not strong enough, they're just going to sputter and not do anything. I'll hear it a lot. The bees just never. This one hive just never did it this year. That's usually because they can't get over that threshold. They gotta have more workers inside of here. So that's where you're kind of in a pinch when you have 1 or 2 hives. And you can't rob from a bunch of hives to make them strong. So that's why having a couple of hives is pretty handy to do that. So if you had that extra nuke and your hive takes a dive, you can always combine that nuke with it and make it strong. So it always gives you an out to fix your problems if you have it, or you might just steal a frame out of it to boost another hive. So that's kind of what you're doing every time you're going through your hives is just paying attention. Because this one's boiling with bees. It's got tons of dark brood, but no eggs. Okay, well that means there's a problem. Or this one here has all eggs and no brood. Well, that tells me something happened in there too. So it's learning what those things mean. So what are some other things that you guys are seeing inside of your hives that either make you happy or don't make you happy and why? Explain it a little bit. Right now.
I have a question, Tom.
Yeah.
My hive that didn't make it last year and it has drawn comb on it still, can I use that and that would help go quicker?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Just make sure the dead bees are knocked out of it and it's not moldy.
Right.
Although sometimes I'll throw a frame of moldy comb in a really strong hive. I won't put it in a weak hive because it just knocks them down. But a lot of times I tend to scrape the moldy stuff off now instead of trying to use it. Once in a bloom, like it's just a teeny bit of mold over the top of it, sometimes I'll use it, but I kind of have the rule of if I would eat from this comb, I don't expect the bees to eat from it. So if I smell it and it smells like mouse poop and mouse pee, it's gonna get scraped and cleaned. It's not gonna go inside of the hive. But if it smells good and I'm gonna stick a finger in the honey and eat it, they can go on the hive. It's kind of the rule that I use with it. I don't know, other people might have some different views on it. So Steve, when you're going through like right now, when you're looking through a hive, what are a couple of things that you're looking for inside of there right now?
So I've got, right now, in my personal yard, I've got several that overwintered strong. And I'm having to weekly keep up with how much space they have due to the flow.
So what does that mean?
So like, I put on honey supers, probably a month ago. And I've been watching those honey supers and watching to see that they build. And last week I added a 3rd super to the big hive. Because I noticed my first 2 honey supers were basically 80% wet. Obviously they're not capped because they haven't dried it off yet, but I need to keep giving them space so they're not backfilling that lower box, those lower boxes. And it's a pain to go through because I gotta lift those heavy boxes off to get down to my brood because I do want to keep an eye on, am I seeing queen cells down there? Have they decided to replace the queen and start doing something down there? Am I seeing my eggs? I'm probably not looking directly for my queen. I'm just looking for eggs to make sure she was still around 3 days ago. And it also gives me an idea of how many frames I got looking like that on the right. Because I know that my 2 boxes over is struggling or is just requeened. And it gives me a mental note of how many resources I got in my big hive that I can split amongst my smaller hives. So that's also why I wanna get down there in the box and see what I got in there. Not because be like, oh, hey, it's doing great, it's because it gives me a mental inventory of what I have in reserves that I could potentially use to balance out for some weak ones. I had a couple that requeened, had one that overwintered and never really did anything. I think the queen was failing. So I did a shake in front of my another big hive, and then combined them.
Explain what that means.
So they made it through the winter.
When you say shake in front of the hive.
I took each frame, so it was, by the time I had reduced it in the spring in April down to a single deep. And it was still puddling along and really spotty pattern, so I decided probably a laying worker if I had to guess. So I took every frame out and walked over to, like it was a established overwintered hive that was like 2 hives over. And I put an inner cover down, so that any nurse bees that were around who are incapable of flying have an opportunity to climb up that inner cover and to the hive landing board. And I literally shake the frame and turkey feather / bee brush, all of the bees off of that frame. I set that frame aside. I did that for all 10 frames in my box. I had an empty box and I went over there and knocked the box. So I had everything off the sides, all literally on top of the front entrance of that larger hive. And I packed everything back up on a box. I put that box on top of that hive. And I basically walked away, let them do their thing in front of the hive. And so understanding that, I've since gone back through and looked and they raised queen cells in that. So I went ahead and made a split back off of that, using that same box back to the location it used to be in. It's been like 2 weeks later, so it's not like I got flyers coming back there. So I'm looking for, had a couple queen cells, at least 2 weeks ago. So I'm looking for some new queens. So I'm looking for new eggs in those boxes because my queen calendar is saying that she should be on her mating flights. So I'm looking for some new eggs in those boxes. Keeping an eye on total population in those boxes to make sure, do I have sort of a minimum viable number that I can expect the colony to make it while the queen is getting up to speed? Which is another way of saying, do I need to go get a frame of something from another hive? Do I need to do a shake and just add some nurse bees to it? Do I actually need to transfer some brood to it with bees on it?
So what's that minimum viable that you're looking for? Like, what's the point where you're like, oh,
This time of year, I want to see probably, so, looking down in the box, you got frames and you got seams, right? The gap between. So I'm looking for like 3 seams that look like they're populated, right? So if you pull them out, you probably have bees on one side, maybe bees on the other, but typically the bees will work a seam between 2 halves, right? So it may not work this side of the frame, but they'll both be working these 2 halves of these 2 frames. So that's like 1 frame between the 1 seam, right? Because you pull it out, you got a bunch of activity on this side, nothing on this side. It's like a half a frame, right? So I want 3 seams this time of year. If I don't have 3 seams, it's getting to the point where that's probably, they're gonna start struggling with robbing and things like that. So I'm gonna keep on up my entrance. I'm still running entrance reducers right now on my small hives and stuff that I've either had queen cells in or just expecting a new queen to just start laying. Those still got my winter entrance reducers, a little 1-inch guy. My big ones that are overwintered and I'm stacking honey supers on, those are wide open. Full open, because they got, it's like traffic jam central in front. Coming and going.
so for those of you that are trying to figure things out, Steve just said a whole bunch of stuff. Where do you have questions?
When you look at seams, do you look at just the top or do you tilt the box and look at the seams from the bottom? I've noticed a lot of times it'll look like it's a full seam from the top. But if you look at it from the bottom, there's just a half-inch layer of beads at the top.
Yeah, so that is a good point. Typically if I've got double deeps on, it gives me an opportunity to take that top box off. I set my boxes on their ends when I pull them off, so I don't physically set them down. I run sort of a tilted top, so I can't flip mine over and set anything on it because they rock. It'd be like a teeter totter. So I set mine on the side, and that gives me the opportunity to look at the bottoms and look for queen cells, as he had the photo of all the queen cells hanging off the bottom. Allows me to evaluate the bottom sides of the seams to see how full they are. And then it ensures that I'm not squishing any queen cells because I accidentally set it down. Also, like, you can get a lot of hangers off the bottom if they're trying to draw between the frames. So if you set that down, you have an opportunity to squish a bunch of bees. They're just hangers off the bottom. And again, personally, it's just something, I don't know, I saw a mentor or something doing it when I got into it back in 2008, and he always set them down that way. So I guess
Doesn't matter which side.
I usually tip them up on end, like
In the long end.
the long, yeah, so they're long height, not short height, but that's because right, when you stand behind the hive, you pick it up from the side and then you just kind of rotate, set down, as opposed to, I mean, I guess if you work your hives from the side, but I always.
Set them down on the side, though, then like, tenants collapse on each other.
Yeah, so yeah, vertical, so they're not laying down.
Less smash.
Yeah, but again, for beginners, that might be more problematic because you don't have the propolis. All mine have been around for years, so I've got a ton of propolis, so like. I can set those up vertically and I know they're not gonna move because they're all cemented in and stuff like that.
I do that with my honey supers. I'll put the first box on the lid, and my other ones I'll set on them on the grass or even on top of that other box.
And the other reason why I started doing that is it gives me an opportunity to keep up with what boxes where.
You know,
If I take them off in reverse order, then like a box I want to put on first is at the bottom, then you gotta like play the shuffle game and unload your entire stack to get down to the bottom, or maybe I just want a couple frames out of that one, so like. You'll see me like in a big hive, I might have 4 or 5 supers that are on that hive all kind of spread out around me. And then I kind of keep a mental note of, you know, this one was honey, I may not.
explain that a little bit, like how you were moving around when you're manipulating.
So like my honey supers, I'll typically add my empty ones directly on top of my brood box. So they're closest to the brood box. So my oldest, most capped honey is at the top.
You checkerboard it, or do you?
Checkerboard's kind of a different thing. I'll come back to that. Just to follow up with Tom's. I don't necessarily go through all my honey supers. I might pull a frame out of the middle just to see how we're doing in the middle. Has she moved up and laid? If I'm not running a clinic excluder on a hive, currently I'm not running any clinic excluders, but that doesn't mean I won't. I kind of how I'm feeling on this hive kind of thing. So if I pull it up, it's all wet but not capped. You know, when I lift it, it gives me an opportunity to gauge how much honey is in that, how much nectar is in that. So I kind of stage them based on how heavy they are. The heaviest to go back to the highest height to last on. And then if the queen has moved up and started laying some of those supers, it gives me an opportunity to evaluate how much brood I got in there. Is my queen up in there? If it is, then am I moving her? Am I gonna go ahead and move that whole box down below a deep? Am I gonna head and move some of those frames over to a lighter, to a hive that's struggling, that needs some resources, because those are easy frames to move. So that's how I'm sort of evaluating the frames as I pull them out and set them aside. To your checkerboarding comment, checkerboarding is more of a late spring activity. You know, if you were lucky to overwinter in a double deep, one of those was pretty full of honey. And now you've got the bottom box that they're working with brood. And then you've got this sort of 4 to 6 inch honey cap in the top box. And then you go start stacking top boxes on top. A lot of times queen won't cross that honey cap. Because nature's kind of said, hey,
More for brood than it is for honey.
yeah, so the nature's kind of said, hey, the queen kind of understands that the honey goes at the top of the hive, so I got no reason to climb across the honey cap to get up there to all that open space. So by splitting up those empty frames at the bottom with those honey frames at the top, I can kind of encourage her to move up into that top box. You gotta be careful with that early spring. I don't want to be splitting up the brood nest. So like, as this is a March period of time, I'm certainly not gonna be checkerboarding in March. You know, as we get into April,
Even a couple weeks ago.
yeah, cause you still got some cool nights, but. So it's again, it's just an opportunity to split up that all that packed used space and give them the illusion that they have some more space up here to work, spread out, see the boxes I put on top. If I'm moving, and then I don't, you know, I've heard plenty of people say they'll move honey around in the hive. Seems like I'm doing it more than they are. It's not like I've intentionally put a honey frame right in the brood area just for the express purpose of having to move it around. Typically, I'm moving around for them because I'm like, hey, you need space down here to do your thing, and I'm gonna move the honey up here, and that gives me allows me to keep a mental note of how much honey I got going on, because you know, I like to start counting my chickens for my July honey harvest now. And how much I'm gonna get.
So
How many supers then do you run for your brood boxes? And more than 2 or do you 3 or?
I'll do double deeps. To be honest, for a lot of years, I've run a deep and mediums on top of that. And my deep was sort of my dedicated brood box. Technically, if you look at the commercial guys, they'll run an entire brood box out of a single deep. Yes, technically, if you look at how often she lays and how many cells there are and how long it takes for her to lay, it's a 3-week cycle. So by the time what she's laid hatches out, it'll be opener for her. Yes, technically by the calendar, it works. The problem there is if you don't keep every single frame from number 1 frame to the 10 frame open and not honey bound, not any honey down there, then you start reducing the number of cells she's got and you run out of space. So the commercial guys are constantly pulling those honey frames on the edges out and giving space in the middle and sort of kind of constantly working that brood at the bottom box out and around. Again, technically you can do it. Is it something that I generally recommend for the hobbyist beekeeper? Probably not, because the reality is,
Life happens.
yeah, like I've got a beginner I'm working with right now. And you know, she's talked about, you know, I talk a lot about, you know, you get busy and it's a week or 2 or 4, and I'm like, guys, gotta get into them every week this time of year, you know. And it's been the only reason why she's been in them for the past 2 weeks is because I was there, because there was an incident and the stand collapsed and her hive went rolling down the hill, and it was a whole thing. It was a whole thing. So, you know.
We don't have bears here.
So I think
One of the things that he said earlier that I think is really important and that I try to do is like, okay, I've got one hive that's got, last week it had almost a full super of honey. It had another half super of honey. So I put a 3rd super on. I come back today, actually. That other one that was half full is almost full, and the next one is half full. And so I put another empty on, so I'm staying ahead. Because you have to give them plenty of room to put that nectar in, because that nectar takes up a ton more space than the honey does once they dry it down. And so you've got to give them that space to be able to put that nectar in and start to dry it. And so I don't know, do you have any idea how much more room the nectar takes than the honey does?
I don't know, like,
Space.
in the last couple of years, it seems like they either never capped or it took them absolutely forever to get it capped. I had hives with like 4 supers that they didn't have any cappings on, and they didn't cap it until like mid-July, something like that. So just it
No,
depends.
Know yourself, right? Like, if you know you're not good about getting out there every week, or you're got the summer vacation come up, you're gonna be gone a week. While I'm saying I'm putting a super on at a time, that doesn't mean you gotta put a super on at a time. You can put 2 on, you can put 3 on. Right, this time of year, stack them all on there, right? Like, they never fill it up, they never fill it up. You know, I'd much rather you put 3 on at once and not use that top one than only put 1 on and then not come back in 2 weeks and they've backfilled the brood nest that swarmed on you.
So on that topic, since a lot of people are either new or they bought some new hardware, it's one thing to put a box of foundation, and it's another thing to put a drawn super on there. So the drawn super is comb drawn out with no nectar in it, and then a foundation is just that. It's just the plastic or wax in there that hasn't been drawn out. The comb hasn't been drawn out, and I find I really got to get them to work it. I got to move stuff around. Even right now with a good flow, I still got to manipulate my frames around, like as people that are just getting started or managing stuff, kind of getting the hang of it. I like to take and put, now that the nights are warm, I like to take that outside frame and I'll move it inside and I'll put it next to a frame of dark brood. That frame that hasn't been touched, I'll put it right next to a frame of dark brood so that when those bees emerge, they go to work on that. And again, the heavy wax frames are worth every single penny. I mean, you can get away with throwing a frame in there that's foundationless. I think you're gonna have more troubles than it's worth. Does it work? Yes, you can make it work, but there's repercussions to some of those things. I always get nervous when people talk about checkerboarding, because I think spreading your beat in the hive body, I'll see a lot of times people going and checkerboard it, although like I told you, when you got your nukes the other day, frame of bees, empty frame, frame of bees, empty frame. I was assuming you're putting your drawn comb in there when I told you that. I wouldn't want them spread out like that unless it's warm at night, because it'll make all the difference. But if you have drawn comb, that queen will get in there and lay all that up. And you'll go to town with that. Same thing with your supers. I will move my frames around where I'll take my cap frames and move them to the edge, and I'll put my undrawn ones in the middle. But I'm always rotating new foundation in there. And like the plastic foundation, they don't like it. The plastic frames for supers and even in your hive bodies, they don't want to draw it. So you gotta kind of put it in a position where they want to draw it, or that they can be successful drawing it. So putting it next to that brood, putting it on top of the bees, you're gonna have a lot better success. They're not gonna just go say, hey, there's a frame 4 frames over there, you need to go work. I'm gonna go work that one. A lot of times you gotta recommend it.
Steve, when we're talking about, you have to move your honey around because they don't seem to be moving it like the books say they are supposed to.
I mean, they might if you give enough time, but.
But
really in a week.
I'm sort of running into that same thing too, where they're just nectaring up the brood nest. We often treat with, things that would cause, like they say, don't treat the bees for mites if, you got supers on. Would that create a situation that if you got a deep frame that has been filled with honey and they cap that, can you extract that and sell it, or is that something you just don't want to do? They haven't been treated during the nectar flow.
Yeah, so it kind of depends. First, you know, I'm pretty religiously taking honey on July 4th weekend. By then they have everything capped. They have enough capped. Some years, depending on seasonal weather, it might go, you know, second week, third week in July. I rarely take August honey. I might take June honey if I've got a really strong float on overwintered hive and I got a good harvest of it's the tree.
Basswood? Linden, basswood,
Uh,
black locust,
Black locust. Black locust.
it's just finishing up right now.
You know, or honeysuckle, I had a really good couple of 3 years ago, I had a really strong, they just hit all the honeysuckle.
This year's incredible.
Yeah, it was just like, the honey was just like sucking on honeysuckle. So I have taken in June on a rare occasion, almost always July 4th, like I schedule, you know, people are like, hey, you taking honey on July 4th? I got friends that come in to help extract and like to be part of that. So July 4th is really, let my go, no go, and then that sets up my July month to start my treatment. You know, if you're using vaporized oxalic acid, that doesn't penetrate your wax caps.
Yeah.
So you have a lot less concern about any deep frames that were in the brood box that got treated. There's been years that I pulled deep frames for honey. Typically, I can kind of gauge what are this year frames versus last year over winter, you know, they have a different color to them, you know, the new frames are lighter, you know, really white, they've got, you know, nice. The cappings just look different, right? And I'll try to pull those instead of the other ones. The other issue is that of concentration, right? So if you're pulling honey and extracting from, if you just got 1 or 2 hives, maybe it's not, it's not a lot, but like, what is the amount of potential, you know, if you're treating with acre garter, right? What's the amount of chemical that's made it through the capping on that 1 or 2 deep frames that you had mixed with the other 5 or 10 gallons of honey that you pulled at the same time, right? And so it's probably an issue of just concentration, where at the end of the day, in my opinion, it's not gonna matter to me because, you know, I'm probably not pulling that many deep frames to begin with. And I do most of my treatments after I pull my main honey supers in July.
I think the other thing you're probably doing too is any of the stuff that overwinters, you're feathering your feeding, right? So you're going easy on the feeding, getting them, you're monitoring, right? You're checking to see if the larva is wet, that their good nutrition is going on. But if they got some honey in there, maybe you're slitting the cappings or something like that, or you're moving it around in the box, making it close to them so they can get to it, or putting it outside of a hive so they rob it or something like that. So that they're using up that honey that may have been exposed to apivar or something like that, or a treatment, those kinds of things. I'm guessing.
Yeah, and I had a mental note on a comment about putting new frames of foundation in. It's my experience that if I'm trying to insert ones and twosies into heavy drawn honey supers, they will much prefer to draw that existing honeycomb into the gap of that frame of nothing.
I'm
Then
so
they
glad you
will-
mentioned it.
Yeah, then they will to draw that brand new frame, and so you'll wind up with like 2.5 inch wide frames because you checkerboarded, you know, every other frame of that honey super with new foundation, and now you've got like 4 or 6 frames of like super wide fat honey, which works okay if you're gonna like pull that out and extract it, but like if you want to try to move those frames over and start sticking them into like a normal spacing, that dog don't hunt.
Yeah,
So
but I think that's a big difference there is that if you have cap honey, you can put an empty frame next to it. So like when I do it, I'll usually put 3 or 4 frames, I'll move them into the middle that are new foundation, and the cap stuff I'll move out to the edge or something like that. But you're 100% right where they'll draw fat. Now in the brood chamber, on the other hand,
I was gonna get to that where if I've got those singles that I wanna draw, I'll always put them on my brood nest, because that brood nest frame, at that brood nest cell, never changes in size. It's always that guaranteed length. So I can put them down there and I don't have to worry about them pulling those cells in and screwing everything up.
Yeah, so we're out of time, but please, as you're walking out, shake some hands in the parking lot, trade numbers, go work bees. Steve's place is pretty cool. He invited me out. He had baby goats, and I should have gone. Goats freaked me out, but Steve's an awesome guy to go work bees with. Their field day's coming up. I think it's June 10th in Peoria. Highly recommend it. I've always enjoyed going to your field day. I've always learned something going to it. I really enjoy watching Steve go through hives. I've learned a lot from him. And he learned a lot from me going through stuff too. Like we trade back and forth where we'll discuss like, what do you see here? What do you think is going on? And just talking to somebody else as you're going through it really helps. Even if it's two new people, just it helps with you being accountable going through your bees. So like you gotta be purposeful about it. And if you have your bee buddy, you say, you know, Saturday at 10 o'clock, we're gonna go through my hive, and then we're gonna go to your house and go through your hives. It's a date and time that you're set to do it. Just get in and go through your hives. Take lots of pictures. You can usually wave your phone around. You don't have to sit and frame it up perfect. Just wave it around, take a bunch of pictures. One of the 4 or 5 might be a good one. Post them on the Facebook page and ask questions. I saw now there's an anonymous thing on there. That's pretty cool. I like that. I saw somebody post that. That's a really cool idea. If you're embarrassed, you could say post anonymously so people don't flame you. You know, say that you should, because there's some real nut jobs that are on our page that aren't very nice, and I apologize for that, but we can't stop everybody. But post out there. Most people are pretty nice about things, but some people are pretty short. Post the pictures. That's the best way to get help. If you're gonna text me and ask me a question, most of the time I'm not gonna answer you unless you send me a picture. Like I might send back, I need pictures. Because I can't do anything until I see the pictures. But anybody who wants to come play bees with me, hit me up. I'm working bees usually every night except for Mondays. Let me know when we can go through nukes till you're tired and exhausted of doing it. You can come out and look at 1, you can look at 20. It doesn't matter. Whatever you're comfortable doing.
And we're
Go
one
work
week.
bees. MPK's doing a call hive.
Yeah,
inspections
it's
too.
Fridays this week and Friday, we rotate between Friday, Saturday, Sundays and Mondays. So because some people have it. All right, we need tables, pull it up, there's kind of like a little thing on the bottom, stack chairs for us, please. Tom, does this look familiar? No, it talks about queen.